Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We are looking way past the sensational headlines to really examine the hidden, structural, legal mechanisms that allow industry abuse to basically thrive in the shadows for decades. We're going to analyze how the entertainment world has weaponized contracts to silence victims, and we'll be using the staggering federal case against Sean Diddy Combs as our primary case study. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So the sheer scale of this issue is, well, it's honestly staggering. Over 3,000 individuals have come forward with accusations of criminal behavior against Combs. He is currently facing over 120 allegations of sexual assault, with 25 of those involving victims who were literally children at the time. I mean, it's an absolutely abhorrent and horrifying detail that demands unambiguous condemnation. And this isn't just a handful of isolated incidents, right? This massive figure represents what many legal experts and industry insiders consider to be just the tip of the iceberg. It really forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. How on earth does a pattern of behavior this massive stay hidden for so long?
Well, here is our roadmap for today to help figure that out. 1. The fall of an empire. 2. The culture of silence. 3. Weaponizing the NDA. 4. Exploiting legal loopholes. And finally, 5. Breaking the sound barrier.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the fall of an empire, focusing on the Combs indictment.
What is truly revealing here is the precise language used by U.S. prosecutors. This isn't just about the actions of one single man. It's about an entire corporate infrastructure. The federal indictment explicitly states that Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of his multifaceted business empire to literally create a criminal enterprise. So we're talking about RICO charges here, racketeering and sex trafficking. The indictment alleges this enterprise engaged in forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. It was a highly organized operation that allegedly used his corporate entities, like Bad Boy Entertainment and Combs Global, to actually facilitate and cover up commercial sex and abuse.
And once the cracks appeared in that foundation, the empire fractured incredibly fast. Just to put it in perspective, in March of 2024, Homeland Security raided his homes in Los Angeles and Miami. Then, just a couple of months later, in May, CNN aired a horrific 2016 hotel surveillance video showing Combs assaulting his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. Prosecutors actually point to this as a clear, undeniable example of the physical force he used to maintain control. Fast forward to September 2024, and Combs was arrested and indicted in New York. With trial testimony beginning in May 2026, this timeline shows a really rapid cascade of legal consequences following Cassie's initial 2023 lawsuit, which, you might remember, was settled for $20 million in just a single day.
That brings us to Section 2, the culture of silence, hiding in plain sight.
So the crucial point we need to understand is that this level of abuse absolutely required structural enablers. The indictment details how Combs allegedly used deadly threats, intimidation, and even actual firearms to control victims. We see bribery happening too, for instance attempting to pay off a hotel security guard who witnessed an assault. But perhaps the absolute most insidious tactic was the non-consensual filming of drug-fueled sexual encounters he referred to as freak-offs. Combs allegedly used these highly sensitive, embarrassing recordings as direct blackmail to ensure total obedience from the victims. It really makes you realize that abuse at this kind of scale doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It requires a broad, completely complicit network of household staff, security guards, and personal assistants who allegedly monitored victims, kept them hidden away while their injuries healed, and even helped track down those who desperately tried to flee.
Now moving on to Section 3, weaponizing the NDA. Personal lives as trade secrets.
Before we get too deep, let's just make sure we're completely on the same page. A non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, is simply a legal contract that governs the exchange of confidential information. It essentially dictates what information is restricted and exactly how it can be used. It is a fundamental, defining document of pretty much every industry in the United States.
But let's look at the really stark contrast in how they are actually applied in the real world. Legitimate NDA use, that's all about safeguarding intellectual property, protecting trade secrets, and ensuring corporate strategies don't leak out to competitors. Illegitimate NDA use, however, treats human beings and personal lives as if they are corporate trade secrets. In the entertainment industry, elites have totally weaponized these documents to hide criminal behavior, intimidate vulnerable gig workers, and effectively cover up physical or sexual abuse by threatening absolute financial ruin if a victim ever speaks out. And this brings us right to Combs' standard NDA, which is actually included in the complaint filed by producer Lil Rod. This document is extraordinarily broad. Legal analysts point out that it basically attempts to be a non-disclosure, a non-disparagement, an intellectual property, and an indemnification agreement all bundled into one terrifying package covering Diddy and literally anyone affiliated with him. Now, any lawyer looking at this would likely tell you right away that it's overly broad and totally legally unenforceable. But, that's exactly the trick. The average person signing it doesn't know that. They're simply terrified into total compliance by the sheer weight of all that aggressive legal jargon.
And we have to remember, this is absolutely not an isolated incident. NDAs have essentially become the tool of choice for controlling personal narratives across the board. I mean, we've seen them used extensively in so many high-profile situations. Donald Trump allegedly used an NDA in an attempt to silence Stormy Daniels ahead of an election. O.J. Simpson reportedly required friends and family visiting his deathbed to sign NDAs for privacy reasons. And Taylor Swift even alleged that music executive Scooter Braun insisted she sign a strict NDA just to negotiate for her own master recordings. So yeah, the NDA permeates pretty much every corner of fame and power today.
This leads us to Section 4, Exploiting Legal Loopholes, the Speak Out Act of 2022.
So you might be wondering, how exactly does a law meant to protect victims become a trap for gig workers? Well, in 2022, the federal government passed the Speak Out Act. This was a major step forward that actually prohibits the use of pre-dispute NDAs in cases of workplace sexual harassment and assault. But there is a massive gaping loophole here. The law specifically covers traditional workplaces. And as we all know, the music and entertainment industries don't exactly operate in standard office cubicles. NDAs in Hollywood and the music business are frequently just pushed across the table at private parties, signed on dates, or handed to temporary housekeepers, security guards, and assistants right in hotel rooms. Because these environments blur the line between personal and professional, they completely bypass the protections of the Speak Out Act, leaving vulnerable people entirely exposed to abuse.
Actress Miriam Shore, who has strongly advocated for SAG-AFTRA to ban these extremely broad documents, puts it absolutely perfectly. She said it's insane that the plot of the next Spider-Man movie and raping a person are given the same contractual treatment. Abuse is not IP. And this just perfectly captures the moral failing of the current system. We are literally treating profound human rights violations as if they were movie spoilers or leaked album tracks.
Finally, Section 5, Breaking the Sound Barrier, a call for reform.
Legal experts and industry advocates argue that a real shift toward transparency requires 3 major steps. First, we absolutely must reform the standard boilerplate NDA language used in the industry so it explicitly carves out reporting for abuse and criminal acts. No more ambiguity. Second, courts and legislatures need to seriously increase the scrutiny and standards for enforcing these agreements, making it crystal clear that contracts designed to cover up crimes are void from the start. And third, we need a regulatory framework that actually balances a business's legitimate need for confidentiality with fundamental human ethics and safety. Because contracts must protect intellectual property, not predators. And this shift doesn't just protect celebrities, right? It sets a precedent for every single workplace in the country, ensuring that power dynamics can never be used to silence everyday people.
Fortunately, there is some serious momentum building right now. Take the Can't Buy My Silence campaign, for example. It was co-founded by Zelda Perkins, who was actually the former assistant to convicted sex offender Harvey Weinstein. This campaign is aggressively fighting in places like the UK and Canada to legally end the misuse of NDAs that basically just buy a victim's silence. Women like Perkins and Miriam Shore represent a very real hope for transformative change here, proving that these legal tools of suppression can in fact be challenged and dismantled.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question for you all to think about. Is the staggeringly broad federal indictment of Sean Combs the reckoning necessary to finally end the music industry's culture of silence? For years, the music business has largely avoided its own #MeToo movement, insulated by this crazy web of NDAs, financial payoffs, and complicit networks. But as the legal loopholes are dragged into the light and the sheer volume of survivors coming forward reaches in the thousands, the foundation of that silence is definitely cracking. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I strongly encourage you to keep questioning the structures of power behind the headlines.